Structure. Oh hi, Olale from Onetutor. I was trying to refresh my memory on the structure of a cell, and hopefully it will show me the importance of a structure. In today's video, we're going to be having a look at the structure of a story. How can you structure your story? And why is it important for you to structure a story? For the Cambridge B1 preliminary, how do you write a good title? How do you write the introduction of your story? How do you develop your story? And how do you conclude your story? How do you represent your story in a perfect structure? Don't go away, I'll be right back. Welcome back. Do you remember when you were at school, or if you're still at school, do you remember when you learn about the parts of the body, when you learn the different parts of the body? In this case, if you were having a lesson about the parts of the body, you would have as a title of the lesson, parts of the body. You would have the head, you would have the body, as well as the legs. So we are using just a simple structure of the body today. So we can liken the simple structure of the body today to what the structure of your story should look like. So where you have the parts of the body, that should be your title. Remember, with the title, you could be given two possibilities. First possibility is that you are giving the title of your story. This is the title of your story, and you're supposed to write the story from the title that you've been given. The second situation is that you are giving a sentence. The story would say, or the question would say, start with this sentence. In this case, you would have to look for a suitable title that will match your story. So when we look at the head, as in the parts of the body, you would have the head. The head should be, can be likened to the introduction, the beginning of your story. This is where the story begins. Next, we have the body. The body would be where the story develops, where the action happens. Then, of course, we have the legs. The legs would be the end of the story. It will be where the story ends. If this is your first time here, you might consider subscribing to the channel somewhere down here so you can stay notified of great videos like this that will help you take your English to the very top. Hit the like button if you're learning just a little bit of English every time. Now let's continue with the video. Given a sentence to start with. Remember, we talked about starting from a title, or perhaps you could start from a sentence. In this case, we're going to be having a look at today's structure with an example of starting with a sentence. So we have Jack climbed out of the boat and ran as fast as he could to the beach. Jack climbed off the boat and ran as fast as he could to the beach. So I'm going to continue the story. As he was running, suddenly he heard someone call his name. He heard someone call his name. Who could it be? He thought. Who could it be? He thought. So let's repeat the entire beginning of the story together. So Jack ran out of the boat. Jack climbed out of the boat and ran as fast as he could to the beach. As he was running, suddenly he heard someone call his name. Who could it be? He thought. So this is the first paragraph. This is the beginning of the story. And it gives us an idea into where Jack was, what did Jack do, and what happened to Jack at some point, and how did Jack feel. So when you're writing the introduction to your story, you need to let us know where the person is, what was the person doing, what happened at some point that made the person a bit surprised, it made the person a bit shocked, it made the person to think about something else. So these will set the beginning of the story, because it's not flat. The story, the event is beginning, and the event has taken a different dimension because a new element has been introduced. In this case, the new element is that someone called his name. So Jack climbed out of the boat. Perhaps that was the usual thing for him. He climbed up the boat and ran as fast as he could to the beach. Perhaps he was excited to see the beach. Perhaps he found something on the beach, so he climbed out of the boat and ran as fast as he could. But as he was running, suddenly he heard someone call his name. Who could it be? He thought. So this is how to write the first paragraph, because the first paragraph, which is the beginning of the story, it tells us where a person is, what the person is doing. It tells us what happened without expectation and how did a person feel in the first paragraph. So if you're able to include these sort of information into the first paragraph, it will make you set a good scene that will make the reader want to look at the second paragraph to know exactly what happens next. So this is paragraph 1. You've been given a sentence, you've been given a part to continue your story from. So remember that you have to continue the story, and you have to make the reader to expect a certain thing in the paragraph 1. Let's look at paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 is where the action takes place. Paragraph 2 is a follow-up to what happened in paragraph 1. Remember, in paragraph 1, you created a sort of expectation. There was a sort of a surprise, a strange thing, because Jack heard someone call his name. And he thought, who could it be? He thought. So that's what paragraph 1 is. And of course, in paragraph 2, well, we would not go directly to what he did, but of course, we will create a sort of action. He's going to take some sort of action to see who it was. So in the paragraph 2, remember, the paragraph 2 will be where the action takes place. So you could introduce some time expressions or time phrases. You could say, after a while. So because it's normal if you hear your name, of course, you might think for a while, you might spend some time to reflect on what it could be. So in the paragraph 2, where the action takes place, we have after a while. So you can say after 5 minutes, after a minute, you can say after some time, but it's super important to remember to introduce some time expressions or some time phrases. In today's video, I'm going to be using after a while. So we have after a while, he looked everywhere, but found no one except trees. So that's the first action that he took. That's the first action. He looked everywhere because he heard his name. He looked everywhere, but found no one except trees. And so Jack was frightened. Jack was frightened and decided to go back on his boat. So, well, it's not the end yet, but of course, while he was going, Jack saw his grandfather in front of him. So that's introducing a new element. That's introducing a sort of a twist to the story. So remember, what's super important in the paragraph 2 is that when you're writing your story, remember not to write the story to be flat. It must have different twist. It must have change. And at the end of the day, that change will create the suspense, would make your story to stand out, will make your story to be very interesting to be read. So we have, as Jack was going back on his boat, or while he was going back on his boat, he saw his grandfather in front of him. So he saw his grandfather in front of him. "You're dead," Jack shouted. So I'll say that again. So we have, after a while, he looked everywhere, but found no one except trees. So Jack was frightened and decided to go back on his boat. While he was going, he saw his grandfather in front of him. "You're dead," Jack shouted. So you see in the paragraph 2, there's action, because in paragraph 1, Jack heard his name. In paragraph 2, he's taking action, he's doing something. Perhaps he's checking who could be calling him, is looking, and maybe he could find someone that is calling him, or maybe, and so on. So remember, the paragraph 2 is always action. You do something. The story must do something. You must write that someone, because you created an expectation in the first paragraph. So in the second paragraph, using the time expression, you need to introduce, you need to let us know, you need to show that a person has done something by taking an action to check something, or to make sure, to ensure, or to be able to know who was calling Jack. So in the paragraph 2, he looked everywhere, but didn't see anyone but trees. And then he was afraid, he was frightened, and decided to go back on his boat. But as he was going back, something happened again. You see, it has changed the direction of the story. The story is not going in this way. We're not back on the boat, and that's the end of the story. It's not the end of the story, because you are changing the direction of the story. So he found his grandfather. He saw his grandfather in front of him. "You're dead," Jack shouted. You see, you've created another kind of a suspense. Because of course now we have we have Jack's father that is supposed to be dead, and now the reader is interested to know how the story ends. So in the final paragraph, which is the end of the story, that's where you bring all the actions to a close. We have the introduction. Jack heard someone call his name. In the second paragraph, we heard about Jack taking an action. He looked around, first action, and looked around, but he didn't see anyone. So that's the first thing he did. Second thing, because he didn't find anyone, he was afraid. Of course, you have to show how the people feel or have felt in the story. So he was frightened, and of course he decided to go back on his boat, and while he was going, something happened again. So that's a new element, that's a new thing that is changing your story. So remember, and then Jack finally saw his dead grandfather, and of course he was surprised, he was shocked, and then he shouted, "You're dead," even if though he was his grandfather, but he was very surprised. So this is how you're going to put in different elements, but make sure there is a connection between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. Remember not to make sure your story starts by saying, "One day I saw a person that was walking and he saw another person," and that's the end of the story. Remember, there should be a different twist to your story that will make it interesting and will make the reader want to know more about the story. So we have the paragraph 3, which is the end of the story. Now I'm trying to end my story, so I can end my story by saying, in the end, or finally, Jack felt someone touch him. So Jack felt someone touch him. He hurriedly opened his eyes. It was his mom waking him up for school. So Jack had been dreaming. Thank God, Jack screamed. So we have in the final part, remember that is what makes your story to be super interesting, when you're able to create suspense. Your story must create a suspense. It means your story must not be in the same way. It must not start and just go in one direction. It must create a twist. There must be a twist to your story. So we have in the final paragraph, it was a dream. That's why the title of the story is The Strange Dream, because Jack was in a dream, and that's why we had a different element that has pointed to the fact that it is a dream. Remember that your title must connect with your story. Thanks for watching today's video, everyone. If you have questions about the video, kind of leave them in the comment section. Remember, the more you write, the better you become. Practice makes perfect. And I'll see you at